Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon. Welcome to our sixth session of global business. So today we're going to look at foreign entry strategies. This is another important session for your coursework. So by the end of today's session, you should be able to explain why, where, when, and how to enter a foreign market, and also you should be able to know or explain how do multinational firms organize their operations in host countries. And finally, you should be able to identify and explain the impact of institutional constraints on foreign entry mode strategies and how should multinational firms respond to these institutional constraints and establish their host country operations. So before, again, as usual, before we get started, we need to clarify some key definitions. I'm not sure if you have taken any strategy modules before or strategic management. Some of you, not all of you, but it's good. Don't worry. We're gonna have to be clear about what we mean by strategy. So strategy is a planned set of actions managers take to make best use of companies' core competencies and resources in order to gain a competitive advantage. So when developing strategies, the managers typically examine the strengths, weakness, opportunities, and strengths, even challenges or threats facing the company. They then decide, what kind of customers to target and which product lines to offer, and how best to contend with potential competitors, and how generally to configure and coordinate the company's activities across different countries. Okay, this is what we mean by strategy. So, a key question for you is, why should companies, or especially multinational firms, expand into different countries? In other words, what is the motivation for internationalization? We touched briefly in our second session. Remember, we discussed the limitation of early trade theories. So we actually discussed the motivation for firms to expand abroad. It's not that simple, just or straightforward as increasing income. So there are many complicating factors and indirect factors for firms to expand beyond its home country. And you can perhaps discuss with your neighbors. Think about why should multinational firms expand to other countries, but think beyond the basic, most straightforward motivation. And in reality, it's very complicated, and it becomes increasingly complicated for firms to expand abroad, not just for maximize their profit. There are many complicating and indirect factors or intertwining factors. Think about it. So this is the difference between undergraduate and postgraduate study. At undergraduate level, I'm really happy if you know the motivation is just for increasing income. But at postgraduate level, you need to know more. Or even you don't know, you think about, some of the multinational firms that you know, and why do they, establish a new subsidiary in the host country? For what reason?
How do you know the diverse workforce that can handle international challenges?
Or
So how is that the diverse workforce that can handle international challenges?
so diversify the risk.
No, I mean to have a diverse workforce that can handle international challenges.
To have diverse workforce to handle international challenges, so you need to gain access to different skill sets. Yeah.
But then if there are like people from different cultures, the companies are formed, and it will have more credibility. For example, if someone is from third world country especially, and they see someone from their country also representing the firm, they'll have more faith in the company and probably give it a shot.
Yeah.
So it'll be more credible for them.
So it's looking for smart operation and cheap labor. And also because they want to be their name to be stronger and also to economical growth. Yes, basically.
Yeah, so to actually gain access to low-cost labor, and also perhaps achieve economies of scale, or one of the reasons is to have extend their brand power, for example. Yeah.
And also, for example, pharmaceutical is fun because when they want to patent a new molecule, they need to do clinical trials with all the races because all the medication they work different depends on the race, and also because they want to use the because it's easier according to Helsinki politic to people are more likely to Russian minorities and people with economical problems in a third country world. So it's easy for them to do clinical trials.
Okay, so they might be able to do clinical trials in different countries to gain access to the local expertise or knowledge, or take advantage of the
So like
regulation.
different races have different immunities, right?
Yes.
So testing it on different countries.
Okay.
Different countries will have
So
that.
gain access to the resources on
Exactly.
different rates.
And also because in clinical trials, when they are trying to new molecule, they can cause side effects, and it's easier to get assigned, because it's kind of experiment to people with economical problems and inter-country wars. So it's easy for them, for people to enroll to clinical trials. For example, in this country, people are more likely to do an safe because they are more afraid to side effects than in a third country where people don't have any option. So it's easier to, find people for joining the clinical trials.
Okay, so you want to test on different rates. Ultimate reason is you find easier for people to be volunteers.
Yes,
And
exactly.
also, if you're testing in different countries, as I said, you should test it on different rates. We have different ethnicities.
Yes,
So some medication might work well, may work well on Asians, but it might not work well on African,
yes.
or perhaps some British. So we're in different rates, and it's easier to gain access to volunteers.
Yes, exactly. Also, the lack of competition. For example, in Europe, since are more industrialized country, they have more competition. But if they go to other country where they're going to, they don't have too much to companies to compete.
Yeah, so it's in a sense you can avoid sometimes competition in one country, but globally you might always compete with same levels. Yeah.
I don't understand, like competition in the sense like for clinical trials?
No, in general companies.
Yeah, depending on the nature of the industry. So in some industries, you might have firms might compete with the same competitors everywhere, but in other industries, each country might have different set of competitors. In a sense, what Camila mentioned is interesting. If you're in an industry that you want to avoid high-level competition, in some cases you can go to different countries to avoid the strong competition at home. But
It is only
depending
possible in a heterogeneous market. If it's a monogamous market, it makes no sense.
depending on the nature of the industry.
For example, technological. Some Americans don't produce a lot of technology, so a German company goes there.
Yeah, depending on the nature of the industry. We're going to talk about this question specifically in today's session. So some industries typically are called global industry, where competition takes place on a global basis, whereas other industries we call the multi-domestic industry, where each country has a different set of investors or competitors. So now, anything else you want to add, please?
Market share. Market share.
Market share, excellent. That's another good reason, yeah. So first, expanding about primarily to gain access to the market share in the foreign country.
And also, it could be that producing in different country can reduce the cost of production. without impacting the price.
They can pay lesser taxes.
Actually, you can achieve economies of scale and gain access to low-cost labor locally. Please.
I just want to be sure. Could we say tax advantages, seeing that some countries have specific really tax laws?
Tax evasion. Sometimes
Tax avoidance, actually.
it's illegal. Tax evasion is illegal. And you got to, sometimes there's a law, even you operate in a foreign country, you don't have to pay tax. But when you're coming back to your home country, and they will, host country government, although they don't have to pay tax, they typically take certain percentage of the foreign earning in their country out of their revenue. So as long as you put this money inside the whole country, the government will not take your money away. But if you're taking the money away back to your home country, they'll take a certain percentage out of the money. So this to do with politics between countries. Yeah. So very interesting. We covered market-driven. We covered sort of efficiency-driven to achieve economy scale and gain access to low-cost labor, and we also cover resource-driven to gain access to either patients, or volunteers. Anything else? So we cover 3 motivations, 3 objectives. Another thing related to resource-driven, what typically call this natural resource-driven is, in the past, many of the multinational firms actually expanded into African countries, for example. Especially, we have someone from Angola, right? Yeah. So these companies, especially oil companies, yeah, they do natural resource exploration in African countries, especially Angola. So we call this model Angola model. If you're interested, you can Google Angola model. You'll find plenty of studies and research being done to explain this phenomena. So this is another interesting phenomena, important motivation with natural resource driven. Whereas market driven and natural resource driven, these are 2 very basic and or well-established motivation in early research. So now moving further, increasingly, the motivation becomes more complicated, especially we have efficiency driven. And there's another most latest research or increasingly complex, please.
I just wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, please.
Around the Angola
Yes.
model. Isn't that based around like imperialism and colonization? Is that
No.
Is that
No,
like but
no.
with other examples, like other cases of like oil and everything in other parts of Africa, like it's not like it was a choice or like a business arrangement. They just came in and took the resources.
Well, I think depending on the angle you're looking at. So from the perspective of international business, we only look at like their motivation, by venturing into African countries to gain access to a local, good quality natural resource. Yeah. Perhaps from sociology aspect, what you're saying is right. Yeah. But from the angle of international business, we don't consider colonization. Yeah. So only focus on the motivation for multinational firms to do business in African countries. Yeah. So anything else? Think about more complicated. Now, what about most companies, biopharmaceutical companies, for example, around the world, almost every single well-established biopharmaceutical firm, they have a subsidiary in the United States. Do you know why is this? Biopharmaceutical firms, they have a subsidiary, most of them, even 80%, around 80%, they have subsidiaries in the United States.
So, from what I know, they have products that are manufactured by the brands based in the EU, which sell for cheaper compared to the ones in the US. because they have a higher pain capacity, so they can market it. For example, there's like a 30% difference in basic pain medications like paracetamol versus ibuprofen. The both of them are manufactured by EU manufacturers versus the US manufacturers. There's a 30% price difference. So will that be one of the factors?
Yes, if you think about further why there's a price difference, why perhaps US can produce or manufacture drug more efficiently than in Europe.
Better resources?
Almost there, almost there.
Better resources, better administrative policies, better environment for production.
What is the call? What is the call?
Larger market, diverse, larger market.
Beginning, I remember Kosi mentioned something to gain access to the diverse set of knowledge.
And also they invest more in research.
Yes, little bit further. So if you invest more in research, the more you invest in research means
You have more market data.
the more innovative you are. Yeah. So most biopharmaceutical firms, they establish subsidiaries in the United States primarily to gain access to cutting-edge knowledge in the global biopharmaceutical sector in the US. Okay, so this is the most recent innovation. Most recent motivation is innovation seeking or learning seeking. So they expand into foreign countries. They don't, not because they want to earn profit or they want to gain natural resource or achieve efficiency. Simply because they want to gain access to the advanced knowledge in that particular country.
And also because in third country wars, there are policies that are weaker. For example, oil companies in my country are owned for Canadian and Spain companies that they contaminate my country, but they cannot contaminate Canada, for example.
Yeah, so sometimes you can take advantage of institutional variation.
Yes, exactly. They are weaker.
Yeah. So that might be another interesting direction for international expansion. That might be an emerging area. So we have discussed these 4 different objectives for internationalization. Now, if we match these 4 objectives according to the location, say if a multinational firm, they want to expand abroad to look for natural resource, where should they locate? If we match these objectives according to location. So I'm going to look for locations where the quality of the natural resources is high, but the cost is low. Where should I locate? So it is natural resource seeking. So what would be the best location for me to expand? African countries are excellent, where the cost of natural resource is low, but the quality is excellent. Now, if it's market seeking, where should I locate, or where should I expand into?
Asia Pacific.
Yes, Asia, China, Asia Pacific. So these emerging market countries, especially BRIC countries, where you need to have a high local buying power, high local demand. Customers are willing to pay. Yeah, and those countries with a high level of GDP growth. So which means they have greater demand, and I could earn more money. Yeah, I have a greater market share. Potential market share is huge or enormous. Examples are those Asian or emerging BRIC countries. You know BRIC? Yeah, Brazil, Russia, India, China. Okay. Now it is efficiency seeking. Where should I locate? Europe? Oh, I need to achieve economies of scale, and I need to look for places where there's abundant low-cost labor.
Oh, maybe LATAM and then Asia Pacific too.
Yeah, Asia as well. Asia Pacific countries, emerging market countries where there are abundant low-cost labors. But bearing in mind, there should also be a well-developed transportation and communication infrastructure, because if you're not just producer, you need to ship your product elsewhere. So if you add up the transportation costs, your overall production costs might still be high in some cases in comparison if you produce locally.
Yeah, Asia Pacific or Latin America.
Yeah, perhaps Latin America. yeah, Asian countries such as Vietnam, perhaps. So if it's innovation seeking, what about innovation seeking? You need to look for locations where there are plenty innovative individuals, companies, universities, and also industry agglomeration. Yes, United States is a great place. So in fact, most advanced economy countries, so they are well developed in terms of knowledge in specific industries. By the way, do you know what is industry agglomeration? Industry agglomeration. No, you haven't come across this concept before. Very simple, it's not complicated. Industry agglomeration is the co-location of companies around a particular industry. And so these companies are typically interconnected. So they are suppliers, manufacturers, or competitors, or complementary firms, and sometimes also include universities or advanced research institutions that develop cutting-edge knowledge in this particular industry. 20 examples in the UK will have Oxbridge Scipath. Yeah, so the co-location high-tech companies around 2 top universities in the UK. And in the United States, we have Silicon Valley. So this is another example of industrial agglomeration, co-location software companies around Stanford University in the States. And since some of you from China, in China you have the Zhongguancun Science Park, the co-location high-tech companies around the 2 top universities of the country. And so this is what we call industrial agglomeration. So next time, when people ask you, you must know what is called industrial agglomeration. So sometimes for multinational firms look for locations in the host country where there is an industrial agglomeration, and so that they can gain access to both local knowledge and talent. Yeah, near to the top universities, the best place to gain access to the knowledge of the country. So, so this is basically how we match. Yeah, how we match these strategic objectives of internationalization according to the location-specific advantages of different host countries. So this is an important sort of table you can use to make, if in the future you become somehow the subsidiary manager. So this might be something you can use to make your decision. Okay. Now the question is, what are the first mover advantages in a foreign market?
You get to capture the market before the other competitors.
Yeah, so they have the market share much earlier than the other competitors.
Yes, but their products might not necessarily be the best. So the second movers, the later movers, get an advantage over them to just change the product, upgrade it, cause some disruptive innovation, and capture the market.
Yeah, so late movers can perhaps learn and have free ride. Excellent. Any other idea for being in the host country as the first, as a pioneer in a foreign market? Of course you can establish your branding or reputation earlier than your competitors.
I think it depends on the market. Because when it comes to consumers like food, people are not likely to switch because there's a new content.
Yeah.
So there's that. Because it's everyday food, you don't want to change because of someone just in the country.
Yeah. So this might be the late mover advantage. Because
to an extent,
yeah, if you move to a market in a restaurant industry, if you're the first mover, and perhaps people always like something new, fancy something new food. They want to try different food. So if you enter later, you have an advantage rather than you enter first.
Maybe a chance to monopolize the market.
Yes, that's an excellent point. So you can obtain market earlier, you can manipulate the market at the beginning. So think about the advantage associated with the monopoly.
They will have lesser time for R&D anyway. So that is when the late movers come and
Yeah, but as they enter earlier, it might accumulate more experience on the R&D than late movers who are still unfamiliar with this
Yes,
technology.
but once the first movers enter, anyway, the late movers will know what to do.
Yes, this is free riding.
More chances of mistakes for the first movers.
Yeah, so free riding learning for late mover. You're more towards late mover advantage.
Chance to test the market.
Chance to test the market.
Yeah, like with the products or whatever they are.
Yeah, this is a very good direction. Think a little bit further. There are plenty of advantages associated. You're the first one to test the water, so you gain more from that. You know a word called preemption of scarce resources. So associated with monopoly, associated with first one who test the water in a foreign country. Anything. We're all thinking towards the correct direction. But think about a little bit further about the advantage. So being in the market first, then you have better experience. You have more market share. You have access to more resources.
Market scheming.
Huh?
Market scheming
Market scheming.
or price scheming.
Yes. Think a little bit further beyond.
Artificial scarcity.
Huh?
Artificial scarcity.
Don't be too abstract. Be straightforward. Not too abstract. Don't think too abstract. It's not that complicated, in fact. We're thinking toward the right direction, but just a little bit further around the advantages associated with this direction that you mentioned.
They have a greater chance to gain brand loyalty.
Excellent. So effectively, your reputation can be enforced or enhanced by being first in the market because, the customers will have little mind space to recognize new brand when the dominant foreign brand has been established in the marketplace. That's a great point. So reputation can be enhanced. Okay, so let's go through them. I think we just need to think a little bit further, but pretty much I think the direction covers all these advantages because we talk about monopoly, we talk about more market share. So experience curve benefit actually accrue to first movers because their rapid accumulation of experience with the foreign market gives them greater expertise than late movers who are still unfamiliar with the foreign market. And the scale benefits are typically enjoyed by the first mover. We talk about more market share, right? So they accumulate, they establish earlier than their competitors the volume for mass production or bulk purchasing. Okay, so they can achieve economies of scale much earlier than their competitors because they entered earlier. So they have more market share than late movers. And preemption of scarce resources is an opportunity because the late movers won't have the same access to the raw materials, skilled labor, or equipment or components. So they will have to pay dearly for them. So it's always the first time at the beginning is cheaper, but more as the competition increases, the cost becomes more expensive. And you might not be able to gain access to these scarce resources later on. So it's only available for the first movers. So barrier switching costs can be enhanced or can be exploited by first movers by locking customers with privileged or sticky relationships. The late mover will only break with difficulty. So sometimes barrier switching costs can be enhanced by establishing an industry or technological standard. So I noticed since last lecture, I think pretty much almost everyone or most of you are using Apple laptop, right? So personally, I'm a big fan of Apple, but I just can't use Apple laptop because So most of the analytical software that I use, they either, well, you know when you work under the Mac operating, you work under the OS operating system, right? Where the Windows is the industrial technical standard. So most of the analytical software I use, they are compatible with Windows. So they either do not have an OS version or they become very expensive. But they are free under the Windows. But under the OS operating system, I do have to pay. It's very expensive. Or sometimes like SPSS, I'm not sure if you know SPSS. And they have a Mac version, but it doesn't function effectively. It is almost that.
It's limited.
Yeah, in comparison to how it works under the Windows operating system. So for me, the better switching cost of using an Apple laptop is I either cannot use the analytical software I need to use, or I do have to pay for it, or I can't use it effectively. So this is how you enhance better switching costs by establishing an industry or technical standard. Yeah. So you have plenty of opportunities by being first in a foreign market. So first mover advantages are not necessarily overwhelming. We already discussed the late mover advantages. Yeah. So the late movers can observe what worked well, what didn't work well. They might not make so many mistakes, and they might be able to get it right for the first time. So there's a learning effect for late movers. They learn from the first movers' mistakes and failure experience. And also the first movers can imitate the technological or other innovation at much less expense than originally incurred by the first movers, because research shows the cost of imitation is only 65% of cost of innovation. Yeah. Anything else you want to add about late mover advantages? From a cost aspect. Do we have anyone from marketing program? Yes. So do you think for first movers in the foreign market, what would be the first step you need to do?
Understand the culture.
You start.
You have to understand the culture to be able to market it.
Yes. And this is the most important thing, that in order to convince the customer to buy your product, what will you do?
Prove your trustworthy.
Try to get a cost advantage, please.
Yeah.
Market research.
Market research, yes. But how would you convince the customer? This is the best research you need to do from your side. But how would you convince the customer to buy your product?
By pricing it lesser than the competitor who were the first movers.
But if for some very complicated product, the local customers might not even understand. So advertising is a way to
Brand awareness.
yes, raise brand awareness is something that you need to convince customers to buy your product. So the cost of educating customers are covered by the first movers, right? So the customer understands why this product is important for them. Whereas late movers, you don't need to do so. The market or the customer has already been educated by the first movers. So I don't need to do anything. I can just go
And create a product.
yeah, I just need to go ahead, and I don't need to spend additional money to make the customers understand why this is important, and as foreign companies, especially foreign product, might be better than domestic brands. So they save the cost of educating customers. So this is another advantage of late movers in the foreign market. So yeah, so this is actually the list of foreign entry mode strategies. Yeah, I believe most of us, we must have come across some of these entry mode strategies before, right? So if now I classify these entry mode strategies according to equity. So by the way, do you know what is equity?
In what terms?
In finance accounting terms.
Okay.
There isn't any difference, whatever context you are. Equity is equity. Yeah. Do you know what is equity? We have some of our finance accounting program, right? So,
Valuation.
uh,
Is it like the value?
almost there, but not the exact. Almost. Equity. In finance accounting, when I say what is equity, you must know. So equity is a share or ownership of the business. So if now I classify this entry-mode strategy according to ownership. So then I can have two categories. First, let's have a look at the non-equity entry mode. So basically, these entry mode strategies do not involve the change of ownership or do not involve the creation of a new firm. So we call them non-equity based entry mode strategies. Okay, we know exporting. We all know, right? Raise your hand if you don't know what is exporting. So you produce a product at home, ship it to a foreign market to sell. So since you all know what is exporting, then what is the advantage of exporting?
Something that I really sell in my domestic market for lesser price, I might get more money from a different.
But what about tariff?
No.
But if you think about exporting in comparison to wholly owned subsidiaries or joint ventures, so what is the advantage of exporting as an entry mode strategy?
Lower costs.
Excellent. So it's cheapest way to get involved in the foreign market because you only need to produce at home and ship it to a foreign market. That's it. That's everything in comparison to you establish a subsidiary or establish joint venture in the foreign market. It's so troublesome and time consuming. So, and of course it's expensive. So exporting is the cheapest way to get involved in the foreign market. But what is the disadvantage of exporting?
Less control because you're given the responsibility of how the product goes to like warehouses and distributors and all of that. So you have less control of how well the market does.
Little control. And also, remember in the second section I mentioned one of the limitations of early trade theories is they didn't consider the transportation cost. So sometimes transportation costs can make exporting extremely uneconomical, especially for bulky products. Yeah. Licensing. Do we all know what is licensing? Yeah, so it's a company with a proprietary product grants permission to another firm to produce that product for specific royalties over a specific period of time. So what is the advantage of licensing?
A source of revenue.
You
It can be a source of revenue if you're selling your patents.
yeah.
Yeah.
Reduce responsibility.
It's similar to exporting. Is as you mentioned before, it's your licensees could have all the capital needed to establish foreign operations. So it's similar to exporting, but you license out. You don't need to, set up your foreign operations. So what is the disadvantage of licensing?
Sorry?
What is the disadvantage of licensing?
Your product gets more expensive because the dealer has to put its price as well.
You earn less. In effect, right? But there's a major disadvantage.
I think the competition could improve on your product.
Excellent. So if you think about, essentially licensing is you're selling your know-how, right? But you are teaching a foreign firm how to produce a variation of your product. And that foreign firm will eventually learn the technology. They start to create another similar technology and become your potential competitors. So licensing is you are creating a potential competitor in a foreign country because you're selling your know-how instead of protecting your know-how. So what is the difference between licensing and franchising?
Yeah, I was going to ask that.
Licensing gives you more rights of your products because it's with you, but when you're franchising, you're giving it out to different vendors, so you have lesser control over your products.
They are the same. They are actually the same. So here we consider franchising as a special form of licensing. So in licensing, you sell the right to use your product or the right to produce your product or use your technology. But in franchising, you sell the method of doing business. So licensing is very common in the high-tech industry, especially in the software industry. Especially when we use Office software, McAfee, we do need to buy the license first. But franchising is very common in the service-based industry because we are selling the method of doing business, especially in the fast food restaurant, hotels, or convenience stores. Yeah. So we're selling the method of doing business.
Licenses have to be renewed.
They all have to be renewed. Yeah, they all have to be renewed. Sometimes depends. Sometimes you could renew every 5 years or every 3 years. Some of the Office software. I only know the analytical software I use, like SPSS or StatChart. You need to renew every year because they update the software on an annual basis. Whereas others, maybe more complicated technology, you need to renew every 5 years or even every 10 years. So depending on sometimes how much you paid initially. Yeah. So this is licensing and franchising. Strategic alliances are a partnership between two or more firms developed to achieve specific goals. So strategic alliances tend to be informal, do not involve the creation of a new firm or new entity. Participating in strategic alliances can significantly boost a company's product innovation. So we have two different types of strategic alliances. We have technological alliances, typically feature collaboration in research and development, manufacturing, engineering, and design. So for example, Apple partnered with Clearwell to jointly develop Clearwell's e-discovery platform for iPad. Okay? And then we have marketing alliances, typically match a company with a distribution channel with another company that has a product to sell in order to boost the sales of that product. So for example, Starbucks collaborated with Pepsi in order to use Pepsi's distribution channel to sell its coffee-based drink in major supermarkets. And Starbucks also allied with United Airlines in order to sell Starbucks coffee on board. And in the UK, Starbucks collaborated pretty much with all the train operators in the UK to sell Starbucks coffee on board. Yes, if we ever travel by train, all the coffee we can get, they are from Starbucks, right? So this is the marketing alliances. Now, if we look at the equity-based entry mode strategies, so first we have M&A. I believe we all know what is M&A, yeah? So the merger is the pooling of interests to combine two or more firms into one, whereas acquisition is the outright purchase of one firm by another. So acquiring another firm can fulfill one company's several needs. For example, expanding product lines, gaining access to distribution channel, achieving competitive economies of scale, and expanding geographic reach. Okay, although it can be advantageous, but M&A, sorry. What question? It can't speak, it can only type. There's nobody else has any question by typing, so on the chat board, so it's fine. So in reality, actually, although it can M&A as entry mode strategy, although it can be advantageous, but in reality, many multinational firms find it difficult in a sense assimilating another business into their existing operations is not that easy. So primarily because of this reason, in reality, between 65 and 70% of the acquisitions failed to deliver the anticipated outcomes. So if you're going to use M&A as the entry mode strategy, you need to make sure you find the appropriate acquisition candidate. Okay, especially pay attention to the strategic and organizational fit between parent and target firm. You know the parent firm, target firm, right? The parent firm is a company who's going to acquire another firm. and target firm is the one being acquired. Yeah. To give you some examples, so the acquisition of Swedish company Astra by British company Zenica at the time was a good organizational fit. In a sense, the combined firm can achieve greater economies of scales. But at the time, it wasn't a good strategic fit because both companies had a large number of soon to expire patents that could no longer serve as entry barriers to deter the generic drug manufacturers. Another example, the acquisition of American company Chrysler by German company Daimler was a good strategic fit in terms of the complementarity in their product lines and geographic reach. It was not a good organizational fit, primarily because of organizational cultural clash between these two companies. So for example, the American managers actually resented the dominance of German managers who promised that the deal will be a merger of equals, whereas the German managers dislike being paid push-up less than their American colleagues. So as a result, a mass exodus of American managers left Chrysler. So this is a common outcome in an acquired firm. Okay, a successful example is the acquisition of IBM's PC department by the Chinese multinational firm Lenovo. So the deal is both a good strategic fit in terms of the complementarity in their knowledge and also their geographic reach and the branding. And it was also a good organizational fit because the combined firm can achieve a competitive economy of scale in production. Okay, so this is M&A. Now we have joint venture. The joint venture is a new organization that created when two or more firms pool a proportion of their resources to create a new but jointly owned entity. The common reason to form joint venture is to gain access to a foreign market. So in these cases, joint venture typically involves a foreign firm with a product to sell with one or more local partners. So we have two different types of joint ventures. We have a scale joint venture. So in a scale joint venture, partners collaborate at a single point in the value chain to achieve competitive economy of scale in production and distribution. Whereas in a link joint venture, the positions of partners are not symmetrical, and their objectives might diverge. So for example, many of the joint ventures between American and Canadian food companies provide American partners with access to the Canadian market and distribution channels. But they provide a Canadian partner with the opportunity to add to their product lines. So there are plenty examples of joint ventures. You know, Sony Ericsson is an example, and also the LG Philips displays. And in fact, most of the foreign supermarkets like Tesco's, Walmart, in some emerging market countries, they are all joint ventures, although they continue to use their existing brand, but they're actually joint ventures. Remember I mentioned in the third section, this is primarily because of investment barriers. So foreign firms can only enter some of the retail industry in emerging market countries, especially in China, India, through joint venture with local partners. So the reason why they continue to use their previous name is because they want to maximize their brand power. Yeah. So Tesco in India, Tesco, Walmart in India, in China, perhaps even in Thailand, they're all joint ventures. Although they're still using their own name, but they are joint ventures because of the investment barrier. Finally, you all know wholly owned subsidiaries. So you know what is a wholly owned subsidiary, right? If the company decide to produce a product in a foreign country and establish permanent presence in that country. So what is the advantage of a wholly owned subsidiary? In comparison to other entry-mode strategies, such as exporting.
It's also control.
Excellent. You have 100% control over your foreign operations. Yeah. But what is the disadvantage?
High cost.
Exactly. So establishing production facilities and maintaining permanent presence in a foreign country can be very expensive. If the wholly owned subsidiary fails, you cannot recoup all your investments. So this is a costly strategy to use. So remember at the beginning of the session, we discussed the strategic objectives or motivation for internationalization. Remember, we have four main motivations, right? So if I combine the efficiency seeking and innovation learning seeking together, we then have this global integration local responsiveness framework. So global integration is associated with which motivation? Efficiency seeking or innovation seeking or learning seeking? Efficiency seeking. Global integration is associated with efficiency seeking, while local responsiveness is associated with innovation learning seeking because they need to learn local knowledge, learn local customers' unique needs. So global integration refers to coordinating companies' activities across multiple countries to take advantage of similarities across countries. So global integration seeks efficiency on a global basis or worldwide basis, and sometimes facilitate learning, but most importantly, reduce redundancy within the global network. So headquarters justify global integration by citing converging demand patterns, the spread of global brands, or sometimes it could be the diffusion of uniform technologies or the availability of pan-regional media, and the need to monitor competitors on a global basis. So companies specialize in such industries as aircraft manufacturing, credit card, and pharmaceuticals are more likely to emphasize global integration. While local responsiveness refers to meeting local demand and local customer needs in individual host countries. And it requires companies to adapt to especially local customer demand and local competitive environment and local distribution structures. So subsidiary managers enjoy greater freedom to adapt companies' practices to suit the distinctive local conditions. For example, Walmart store managers in Mexico may have to adapt such practices such as store opening hours, employee training and compensation, merchandise mix, and promotion. Okay, so companies specialize in such industries as sometimes food, beverage, fashion, retailing, and book publishing are more likely to be responsive to local differences. So when operating internationally, so this is the most important analytical framework in international business. So another important thing you need to know. So when operating internationally, multinational firms need to strike a right balance between global integration and the local responsiveness. So we sometimes also call global integration as local adaptation. We call global integration as standardization, and we call local responsiveness as sometimes local adaptation. But they are the same thing. We use them interchangeably. Okay, so global integration, local responsiveness is the most important rationale that you need to know to organize your foreign operations. To what extent you integrate, to what extent you adapt. Okay? So what I'm showing you now is a worker that inspecting Coca-Cola's beverage production in a plant in Africa. So Coca-Cola's headquarters provides global brand support and some broad marketing guidance to individual bottlers in the host countries. So local bottlers in different host countries automatically assume responsibilities for local consumer research, local sales promotion, retailer support, and meeting local government requirements. So entering a host country market is a critical first step for those entry mode strategy. But that's not the final stop. But most importantly, you need to know how to organize your host country operations. So in reality, there are precisely 4 different types of strategies multinational firms use to organize their host country operations. So first is what we have is the standardization or global strategy. Is you take a product and you transfer it, or you start from a single case and you scale it up, or you identify the core practices, you maximize the efficiency. So the standardization or global strategy only works when you have very simple products, such as mineral water or oil, or you have very complicated products, such as airplane or computer hardware or a furniture. So the standardization strategy asks a question of why not make the same product same way everywhere. So it emphasizes central control and coordination. And activities such as research and development and manufacturing are centralized at headquarters. Okay? And the management views the world as one large market. So the strategy emphasizes, in this strategy, headquarters seeks substantial control over all country operations in order to maximize efficiency and reduce redundancy within the global network. The advantage of the strategy is it allows companies to achieve economy of scale, precisely to achieve low cost advantage. So what is the disadvantage of this strategy? If we make the same product everywhere, the same way, what would be the... Exactly.
But McDonald's changed
There's
their...
lack of local responsiveness. That's why they don't like it.
But they changed their menu depending on the country. McDonald's.
That's another key point I want to emphasize here is nowadays there is no so-called absolute or pure global, pure standardized product or strategy. So even when you sell mineral water, you have to put your water into a different size, and you have to translate the label into the local languages. And even McDonald's restaurants, they have a core menu, but they also sell different food in different countries. Yeah, but although the main menu remains the same. So nowadays, there isn't any absolute global, absolute standardization strategy. It's always relative. Okay, to a large extent, they are standardized. So the disadvantage of the strategy is lack of local responsiveness. And then we have this so-called adaptation strategy or multi-domestic strategy. Selling refrigerators to Eskimos doesn't work. So first you need to understand customers' needs. You then need to make them understand why this particular product is important for them. So the adaptation strategy is an approach towards internationalization where headquarters delegate substantial autonomy to individual country managers, allowing them to operate independently and pursue local responsiveness. So the strategy only works when the costs of adaptation are much lower than the potential revenue. And in the long run, it's possible to transfer the best practice. So the advantage of the strategy is, of course, it allows companies to maximize the local responsiveness, but the disadvantage is too much local autonomy. And the cost of duplicating the company's effort in multiple countries often results in a proliferation of over-adapted products and reduce economies of scale and increase redundancy. Okay? So the adaptation strategy is very much like the new product development process in the pharmaceutical industry. So for example, when you develop a new drug candidate, so initially you need to identify a target compound out of millions or billions of different compounds against a particular disease. So once you identify a target compound against a particular disease, you then need to test this drug. You need to build a prototype around the compound, and then you need to start testing this drug candidate in a preclinical trials, which is so-called safety test on animals. So once the drug candidate passes the preclinical testing, and you need to test in a clinical trials development, which is what we call safety and efficacy tests on human beings. So in clinical trials, phase 1 aim to test the drug candidate on a small sample patient, less than 100 people. In phase 2, aim to test on a medium sample patient between 100 and 3,000 patients. In clinical trials phase 3, aim to test the drug candidate in a large sample patient with more than 3,000 people. So once the drug candidate passed the clinical trials testing, it needs to be reviewed by the Food and Drug Administration in most countries. So this process typically takes between 3 and 5 years. So once the drug candidate has been approved by the FDA, most drug manufacturers prefer small-scale commercialization before the large-scale commercialization. So once the small-scale commercialization proves to be successful, then the drug candidate is allowed to be commercialized in the marketplace on a large scale. So as you can see, at every single step of the way, a drug candidate has to adapt to various hurdles, okay, until finally to be sold in the marketplace. So it's very much like the adaptation strategy. A company has to adapt this product to the local language, culture, laws, income levels, and other characteristics of the host country. So example companies using this strategy is Nestle. So Nestle applies a multi-domestic strategy to organize its operations, and because of this strategy, Nestle is often perceived as a local firm in each of its host countries. For example, Nestle varies the brand of its Nestle instant coffee. So for example, in Spain, it has intense full-bodied flavor, whereas in Northern Europe, it's mild and aromatic. So Nestle also adapts its marketing. For example, in patriotic Russia, Nestle's advertising focused on Russian history and literature. Whereas in Africa, Nestle hired local singers to visit villages and offer a combination of entertainment and product demonstration. And Nestle even charged lower prices in countries such as China and Brazil to suit the low local buying power. But now they did opposite. And Nestle charged higher prices, especially in countries such as China, to suit the high local buying power. And I remember before the pandemic, back in 2019, a 100-gram Nestle instant coffee only costed £1.50 in UK. And I went back to China. I bought the same size, 100-gram Nestle instant coffee, and it doubled the price. So the exchange rate between Chinese RMB and pound is 1 pound equals 9 Chinese RMB. So in China, it costed 30 Chinese RMB. So we're not talking about the tariff, excluding the tariff. So they double the price. But now, given the rising living costs and inflation, it might be even more expensive. So this is the adaptation strategy. So do you want to have a break for 5 minutes? Yeah.
So, university, So it was a question mark there already. I just read it yesterday.
So the QR code is not working. They sent me the wrong QR code today. And it's the same as previous session. But what I'll do is I will upload the QR code on Blackboard. Hopefully it'll work. If not, I'll go back to the office now to take it. Yeah. So you can't use the QR code to register your attendance even after the session, right?
Yeah.
You can do it. So then I'll upload on a Blackboard. Yeah, because they sent me the wrong QR code. It's the same as your Monday's session.
Yeah, they have like, I think my graduation is like the following week.
This is what happens.
I don't stand my first 2 weeks, you're like, right out.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing, the social side. Yeah. I know I forgot my, like, I know I should get to it. I did like. Like, my dad's like best man, he's like one colleague. They were like, yeah, my mom was really kind of work colleagues. My dad was when they something yeah. Because like one yeah. I'm like the only graduate. There's like one person who's at the year who's in college. It's like, yeah, I'm like all of them. Like the graduates. There's a graduate.
Let me see if they update. It's really slow.
Because I found that I will go once. Maybe the time. Yeah. So you wanna go? Why?
It's not soon. That's ridiculous. You see the information, your QR code doesn't show on the system. That's ridiculous. So how can you register your attendance then? So do make sure after today's session you check the Blackboard. Yeah. So if I got any reply from the timetabling, I'll upload the QR code for today's session. Yeah. So when we need to move on, we can't wait anymore. So, right. So let's get started again. Then we have the global strategy. It's also called the transnational strategies. You think globally, act locally, or you leverage the local specificity, or you identify the best practices, you transfer it, or you centralize the core functions such as research, development, manufacturing, and decentralize the other core functions such as marketing and sales. So the global or transnational strategy is coordinated approach to internationalization, where companies strive to be responsive to local customers' needs, but in the meantime, seeks sufficient control in order to ensure efficiency over all country operations. Okay? So the advantage of this transnational strategy is a combination of global and multi-domestic strategy. So you have both the low-cost advantage and local responsiveness. But the disadvantage of the strategy is, since it has both the advantage of low cost and local responsiveness, but the disadvantage is difficult to balance central control and the local responsiveness. So the strategy only works when the company does local exploration and create local incentives and build local knowledge transfer mechanisms in order to capture local knowledge. And local unions have to be listened. So example of companies using this transnational strategy is Starbucks. So Starbucks leverage its core competencies to standardize its operations across different countries, while decentralizing some of the core functions, such as decision-making responsibilities, to individual countries. So the sum of Starbucks products are developed or differentiated to suit local customers' unique needs. Okay. Another example of companies using transnational strategies is Lenovo. Okay. So Lenovo went global when it acquired IBM's PC department, gaining a global sales force and global brand, such as the ThinkPad line. Okay, so Lenovo rotates its headquarters between China and the United States. For example, planning and design are done in the United States. Manufacturing is done in countries such as China, Poland, and Mexico. So Lenovo concentrates its manufacturing in these low-cost countries to generate highest cost efficiency and economies of scale. So Lenovo's basic computers are the same, but the keyboard and internal software are adapted to accommodate language differences. So Lenovo's retailing website look identical, but are adapted to language differences. But given the difficulty of balancing central control and local responsiveness, in reality, most multinational firms find it difficult to implement a transnational strategy. Okay. So finally, we have the home replication strategy. Now, in home replication strategy, a company views international business as a separate from or secondary to its domestic business. So the strategy emphasizes international replication of home country-based advantages, such as production scale, distribution efficiency, or brand power. So expanding abroad is viewed as an opportunity to generate additional sales for domestic product lines. So the company designs product with domestic customers in mind and pursues international business as an opportunity to extend product life cycles and replicate home country success. So the strategy is relatively easier to implement for firms venturing abroad for the first time. So the advantage of the strategy is it allows companies to leverage home country-based advantage and it's relatively easier to implement. But the disadvantage of the strategy is there's little local responsiveness. And failing to be mindful of local customers' needs and wants might often result in local customers' alienation. So for example, when Walmart entering Brazil and set up exact replica of its US stores with a large number of American football, which is rugby. Obviously, in Brazil, the level of football, nobody plays rugby. So setting up an exact replica only makes sense as a good starting point for experimentation and learning how best to adapt while retaining the core features of the business model. So do you know what is the business model? No? Precisely it's how you make money. Yeah? So this is what we call business model. So this is the home replication strategy. There are also certain industries, we call them global industry, where in such global industries, customers need very little from country to country. Companies typically sell relatively standardized products across the entire regions or groupings of countries. And companies specialize in such industries as airplane, cars, computers, or chemicals or industrial equipment are more likely to cater to customers' needs on a regional or global scale. So in such industries, there is a handful of the same competitors that compete globally or regionally. For example, the American company Kodak always competes with the same rivals worldwide, the Japanese company Fuji and European multinational Agfa Givaudan. American Standard sells similar bathroom features and compete with Toto in most major markets. Caterpillar and Komatsu compete head-on in all major markets and offer similar brands of tractors. So by contrast, in multi-domestic industries, a company has to adapt its products to various differences in local language, culture, the local laws or income levels and other characteristics of host countries. And companies specialize in such industries as processed food, fashion, retailing, consumer product, and book publishing are more likely to actually be responsive to the specific conditions in each country where they do business. Okay, so each country has a unique set of competitors. For example, the British publisher Bloomsbury has translated its volume of its Harry Potter's series into the local language in each country where the book is sold. Okay, and beverage companies offer different brands and flavors. For example, Coca-Cola actually sells Giorgio coffee in Japan, Cafe Zoo in Thailand, and Burn energy drinks in France. Even in Asia, KFC restaurants sell distinctive flavors of chicken, right? So this is a multi-domestic industry. Now let's have a look at the institutional constraints on foreign entry strategies. So sometimes institutional constraints might prohibit certain type of transactions or operations, or they might create a need for local knowledge. Or in some cases, they might change the relative cost of alternative strategies, or even in some cases, motivate tariff jumping. Now the question is, how should firms actually, what are the impact of these institutional constraints on entry mode strategy, and where should firms locate in the host country in response to these institutional constraints? Any idea? So if, for example, if joint venture or if wholly owned subsidiaries are not allowed, what kind of entry mode strategy you might use? If for wholly owned subsidiaries is not allowed as entry mode strategy, what would be the alternative entry mode strategies?
Joint venture.
Excellent, joint ventures. Yeah, and it's better for you to locate in a host country where planning permissions are relatively easier to obtain. Now, if the institutional constraints create a need for local knowledge, so what kind of entry mode strategy is best for you to gain access to local knowledge? So we have different entry mode strategies, but if there is a need, institutional constraint creates a need for local knowledge. So what kind of entry mode strategy you can gain access to local knowledge?
Industry agglomeration.
Entry mode strategies.
Strategic alliances.
Excellent. Strategic alliances, you can learn local knowledge from your local partners, right? And in a similar way, you can also use anything else? You mentioned about joint ventures, yeah? You can also use joint venture because as long as you have local partner, then you can gain access to local knowledge through your local partners. So entry mode strategies like strategic alliances, joint ventures are all feasible strategies. And in this case, it's better for you to locate in host countries where there is an agglomeration of foreign investors in order to help you attain local knowledge. Whereas if there are high transaction costs due to costly contract enforcement and lack of appropriate financial intermediaries in the host country, what kind of entry mode strategy should you avoid? Cool. Wholly owned subsidiaries. Yes. Wholly owned. You should use wholly owned subsidiaries because there's high risk. There's a low contract. Avoid. Yes, avoid. If there's high transaction costs associated with costly contract enforcement, and there's a lack of financial intermediaries who are professional. So actually, in this scenario, first you need to avoid arm's length contractual relationship with unfamiliar foreign partners, and also avoid using mergers and acquisitions as an entry mode strategy because there isn't any appropriate or professional financial institutions in the host country who can give you a more realistic estimation of the market value of your target firm. And if there is any, they are more likely to keep the evaluation high so that the target firm is overestimated above its market value so that they can earn commission from the deal. So first and foremost, avoid using M&A as your entry mode strategy. Okay. And in this case, it's better to locate in the host country where the uncertainty is low. So typically, the capital city is more certain than satellite towns or small cities or even rural areas, where the law enforcement is relatively weak in comparison to capital city. So if you want to look for locations where the uncertainty level is low, typically the capital city is the best, with stronger law enforcement. So finally, if there are higher tariffs or other trade barriers, the best way is to directly locate your production in the host market through investment-based entry strategies, such as joint ventures or wholly owned subsidiaries. Okay, so you can avoid tariff by locating your production directly in the host country, right? So you don't export anymore. You just use wholly owned subsidiaries or joint ventures. Okay. So now I think you can. I'm not sure if you read the case before, but before that, I'm going to show you a video.
Welcome to Wahaha, one of China's biggest soft drinks companies. It was founded in 1987 by Zong Tinghu, by some measures the richest man in the country. Zong believes his success comes from hard work.
My working hours are quite long every day. In the morning normally, I arrive at my office before 7. I eat my breakfast here at work. I go home at about 11 o'clock. I don't have any hobbies. My hobbies are smoking and drinking tea. I'm so used to work, if I don't do it, I feel like there is no meaning to life.
This is Wahaha's HQ in Hangzhou, where Zong is based with his closest staff. He is a senior Communist Party member, and his approximately 40 manufacturing bases in China are run along typical party lines.
My family was really poor. I had no food to eat, as we were so poor. When I first started in 1987, it was just a little shop in the school, selling popsicles and soft drinks. That's how I started.
But Zong's big break came in 1989, when he created a nutritious drink for children that became a huge success across China.
It solved the problem of little kids who didn't want to eat and suffer from malnutrition. Because of this function, it sold really well. Because demand was increasing, we needed to expand.
Trying to help, the government said Wahaha could merge with a failing food canning factory that was much bigger than Zong's small company.
At that time, my employees were very few. There was just 10 of them. But in the canned food factory, there were more than 2,000 employees. So the factory and even their workers looked down on us. They didn't want to work for us. Then the government went there to persuade them to work. They still disagree. So I went. They were persuaded to work for me.
In the transition from communism to capitalism that was taking place at the time, Zong's efforts were given a typically rough ride.
The media said we were capitalists. It was huge negative campaign. So I had to spend nearly $13 million to buy the factory. That's how I made it. The results were pretty good, so that shut people up.
Zong's experience has shown him that success is hard won. These days he wants to help others, but on his own terms.
There is no thing in China, help people in crisis, but not those who depend on charity. So I help poor people. to get the opportunity to work or start their own business.
以光给他挣进去。
If you just give money to them, when they spend it, they are still poor.
Although he's a social activist, Zong may choose to keep control of his fortune within the family.
我女儿是在美国
My daughter went to university in America.
回来，她是江西的一家。
She's back there and in charge of more than 30 factories. She may inherit my fortune or she may start her own business.
Okay, this is one. What's the one show application?
This is a tale of two Chinese companies. Rich, confident, the corporate face of a new, powerful China. One of them is the drinks company Waha. The name sounds odd, but Waha is Latin meaning bank. The other is Bright Foods, famous for trying to buy Jaffa cakes and yogurt. These companies want to deal with the West, but on their own terms.
Waha has a very strong brand within the China market. You see a lot of analysts like James Fallows from The Atlantic says that Chinese can't brand. That's just not true anymore. I think in many ways it was true 10 years ago because there was so much low-hanging fruit. Companies didn't need to think about branding, they competed on price. But what you've seen in the last 5 years is the emergence of companies like Waha that are very good at branding.
But Waha is famous for more than just its brands. Last year, the company emerged victorious from China's investment foreign investment dispute with its joint venture partner, the French dairy giant Danone. In that same year, the company's chairman was named the richest man in China. Two straws in the wind for a new, more aggressive attitude to foreign investors.
应该是中国是还是需要跟外的企业合作。
Chinese companies still need to cooperate with foreign companies, but now the goal is business. China has plenty of money. Now, we want to cooperate with foreign companies and have advanced technology.
Mr. Zong used Danone to help him build a drinks empire that made him the beverage king of China. Now he wants to extend that empire around the world, sourcing raw materials globally and also exporting products like this one, the company's popular iced lemon tea. For in the 15 years since Danone and Waha became partners, China has been transformed. In the old days, foreign companies called the shots. They were the ones with the cash and the technology. But these days, Chinese companies have the upper hand, and they are even splashing their money around overseas, buying failing brands.
Recently, Geely, a Chinese car company, bought Volvo. Now China has another deal.
So that's everything for the case, and so you can read your case now. So it's not a difficult case. You know Danone, this brand. Yeah, got it. I have it. Oh, yes, that's correct. So unfortunately, those left after the first part of the lecture, they won't be able to have the QR code. Yeah, there are some of them left, I remember, right? Someone raise their hand. I don't understand. Sometimes people raise their hand on collaborate because with no information, they can't type, they can't speak. I don't know why they just raise their hand. Have you finished reading the case? It's a short case, it's not long. So what about the first question? Was a series of joint venture profit modes for Danone to enter China? And what would have been the alternatives? Do you think it was appropriate or not?
I think it was. They
What?
just got greedy.
Yeah.
Huh?
I think it was appropriate. They just got greedy.
Yeah, they just greedy, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was.
It would have been properly managed.
Yeah, you would have
Because
been,
they benefited from it.
it would have been well managed. So what would be the alternatives if not joint venture?
They should have just owned their own if they wanted, like, because they got greedy and they were citing that it was their idea. But like, if you wanted that, you could have just owned your own and competed equally in the market with down branding.
Yeah.
I think they could also have merged to take advantage of the brand, the Wahaha brand.
Yeah, they could use M&A as well. Yeah.
But did they want that to merge? Like they are very big, I don't think like it was a possibility.
Yeah, but at the beginning, the problem is that it doesn't want to shoulder the risk.
Yes.
It wants to test the water first and see if it works well, then I'll acquire everything. But if not, then I'll just wash my hands out of that. Now they have a dispute because they couldn't agree on the price. Yeah, so that's the problem with. But the key thing here is regarding especially including the second question. Now, when you are doing business in China, you're setting up a joint venture, you need to realize the position and the objective of partners inside the joint venture. They're not permanent. It changes over time. So at the beginning, perhaps 3 years ago, their objective bargaining power is different. So perhaps 3 years ago, at the time of the case, that now has the bargaining power for the joint venture. But 3 years later, and Wahaha has the bargaining power. So if you are doing business in this kind of scenario, you need to clearly set your boundaries and also think about all possible scenarios upfront beforehand, and then contractually agree all possible contingencies. Yeah, you need to foresee all possible contingencies and put it in the contract. And most importantly, you need to specify. In your contract. The contract is subject to review every 3 to 5 years time, because just in case if the bargaining position changed and the objective changed, yeah, if you cannot foresee all possible opportunities in one go, 3 years later you have another opportunity. So that's the key aspect of doing business in China. Yeah, so the position and contingencies varies and objectives change all the time. So contractually agree all possible contingencies and set clear legal boundaries, and review the contract every 3 or 5 years time if you can, or if you wish, you can also review every 12 months. Okay? So this is the first and second questions. And the last question, how would you suggest that Danone should have managed its relationship with Wahaha?
I think the decision to the approach you used would have been a very good idea, because it was very impossible. It would have been impossible for Danone to dominate the Chinese market without Wahaha.
Yeah.
Because it's harder for Chinese they're more accustomed to companies that are from their region. So it's really hard for foreign companies to really dominate in Chinese market. So I think that, like you said, if they properly managed it, then it would have worked. But it became greedy and tried to fight Wahaha.
Yeah, so it's not, in a sense, it's not a problem managing, it's a problem of being greedy.
Yeah, and the ethical aspects, because they were also buying shares with other Chinese companies, but they were trying to limit Wahaha to just them. It's like you can compete, I can compete too, like. And out of the 70 Wahaha had, they had 39 already, and they were still greedy. They wanted the whole thing.
Yes, and this is even worse scenario would be companies, those semiconductor companies such as Intel. they would invest everywhere in the whole country, including they might invest in you, but they might also invest in your competitors. And they want to dominate the market, and they want to find the best candidate. So if you are out of the competition, you're done. But if the best competitor, they will become your partners. So sometimes when you're doing business with these multinational firms, you can specify in your contract, you're not allowed to collaborate with my competitors. Yeah. So that's another key angle. So the market dynamics is very complicated. So you need to think about all contingencies and put everything you can think of in a contract. Yeah. So this is just think more proactively when doing business in emerging markets. Okay. So thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate your attendance, everyone. Okay, I'll see you next Monday. Thank you. Oh, do we have anybody from Global Business Management Program? Only check out a tool. Oh, excellent. Oh, so many. So we're going to have a corporate meeting tomorrow at 11, right? Yeah. So I look forward to seeing all of you. Yeah, online on Teams. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.